Welcome to the third video on this key area 1.6 for your National 5 Biology. So far we've covered in the respiration topic ATP and aerobic respiration. In this video we're going to look at fermentation occurring in animal cells and in plant cells. The last video you watched was an aerobic respiration, that is respiration occurring in the presence of oxygen. In this video you're going to be looking at fermentation, and fermentation is a type of respiration that occurs in the cytoplasm, but it occurs in the absence of oxygen. Now, animals use this pathway when oxygen levels become very low. So for example, if you're exercising vigorously, say you're out a run and you're running very fast, the muscle cells use up the oxygen, and they use the oxygen up faster than the oxygen can get to the muscle cells. So it starts to become a situation where there is not enough oxygen there present, and the cells will use a fermentation pathway. Now let's have a look at that fermentation pathway. Now the first stage of fermentation is the same as that you looked at for aerobic respiration. That is that it occurs in the cytoplasm. There's no oxygen needed for this stage, and the glucose is broken down to 2 molecules of pyruvate and 2 ATP are produced. But it's what happens to the pyruvate next that is different. Here you'll see an overall view of the fermentation pathway in animal cells. This first stage here I just talked about in the previous slide, where glucose is broken down to produce your pyruvate and your 2 ATP. Now what happens to the pyruvate now is it gets broken down to this molecule here called lactate. Now no ATP is made during this stage. The lactate that's produced here, well, you actually know about that lactate because if you exercise a lot you start to feel your muscles burning, and it's that lactate building up in your muscles. And usually what happens is you stop exercising at that point. And when oxygen then becomes available again, so you stop exercising, oxygen starts to get to the cells in your muscles. And when that happens, the lactate can be converted back into pyruvate. So it's a reversible situation here. And that pyruvate can then be used to go down the aerobic respiration pathway. A fermentation pathway exists in plant cells and in yeast cells. Again, its fermentation is occurring in the cytoplasm in the absence of oxygen. And occasions when this occurs are when maybe plant root cells are waterlogged in the soil and there's low oxygen conditions, or when yeast cells are being used to make wine. Now the pathway for this is slightly different, so we'll go on and have a look at the stages here. Like aerobic respiration and fermentation in animal cells, the first stage that happens is the same. It occurs in the cytoplasm, no oxygen needed for this stage, glucose is broken down to pyruvate, and again you form the 2 ATP molecules. But what happens to the pyruvate in this stage here is that the pyruvate is broken down to carbon dioxide and to ethanol or alcohol. There's no ATP made during this stage. So you'll see in this pathway is different than in your animal cell where lactate is produced. You've produced this carbon dioxide and the ethanol. Now the carbon dioxide diffuses out into the atmosphere, and so this pathway here is non-reversible. In the animal cell, the lactate can be converted back to pyruvate if oxygen becomes available. In a plant cell, that does not happen. The reason for that being that the carbon dioxide has been lost to the atmosphere here. And that means that there's a missing carbon molecule that would be needed in order to get back to pyruvate. Because it's not there, the pyruvate can't be formed again. Here on the last slide, we've got all the word equations that are involved in respiration. So first of all, aerobic respiration, involving the breakdown of glucose, the presence of oxygen to carbon dioxide, water and energy. And remember, there's large numbers of ATP produced in aerobic respiration. Fermentation in plant cells involves the breakdown of glucose in the absence of oxygen, and carbon dioxide, ethanol and energy are produced. And remember, there's 2 ATP produced, and this reaction is non-reversible. Fermentation in animal cells takes place in the absence of oxygen. Glucose is broken down to lactate and energy. And remember, there are 2 ATP produced in that process as well. But this reaction, remember, is reversible.